Okay, this is part 3. Going back in and oiling in the canvas that is completely dry. And I'm going to remix most of the same colors that I used last time. Beginning with the sky color in the back. Beginning with white. And this time I'm just going to jump right in and use ultramarine blue. I think it's brighter, and I think it's the color that they used. Prussian blue just doesn't work good for skies for me. So I'm going to correct some of my sky color. I'll make it a little bit lighter. And I'm not going to mix much of that because there shouldn't be too much. I'm going to go ahead and mix up the light yellow color that is on the shade and on her dress, which is just yellow ochre and white. And it makes a pretty good little pile of that. I have my old colors I used last time that I just kind of mixed all the cools, all the warms, and all the flesh tones in 2 different piles here. The shadowy tones, actually, just as a kind of a little mud. I'll see if I can use those anywhere. Let me go ahead and just make a darker yellow. It's just pure, almost pure yellow ochre for this pile. So I might go ahead and mix the green, the gray-green color. I have a little bit of that left. It was the Prussian and what was in that? Prussian and Viridian with a little orange in it to gray it. Orangish red. So I might just jump over here and just use the pure vermilion. See what happens with that. Okay, that makes kind of a gray color. It's not exactly what I want. I want a little bit greener. There we go. That's a little Prussian, a little Viridian this way, and mostly Prussian with some vermilion this way. Probably the colors I used today are going to be a little bit brighter. So you can see that one has a little bit more of a greenish tint to it, maybe in some of the shadows. Also see some pretty brighter greens that I want to use. And I'm going to try the Viridian with yellow ochre. And a little white. And that's pretty close. That may be a shortcut to the way I mixed them last time, but we'll see. My Prussian is down in here. I think I lost most of that pile, so here's the Prussian. So you can see that's the Viridian in yellow ochre, and this is the Prussian in yellow ochre. Pretty similar. More yellowish for dirt for sure. And when we add white with it, we've got two options. Okay. Also want to go ahead while I'm mixing color and mix up some skin tone. And remember that was vermilion. I'll put that down here on the bottom. And yellow ochre. And I did mix up a little pile of Naples yellow because I thought that was really a little bit brighter and pretty. So you can see that this can go either way. It can go yellowish over here. A little more yellow ochre. And it can go reddish over here. quick pile of skin tone color. Really easy. And then for the shadowed areas on the skin tone, let's try, this is going to be an experiment, so let's try a little bit of the vermilion. I have a pretty good pile of it there. And let's put a speck of Viridian in it. Vermilion and Viridian, the two V's. Let's see what happens. Might have had a little blue on my palette knife there. I don't know. I don't know about that one. Let me dip into the pure color of it and see. That makes a nice dark. So you might see that in her neck. It just feels a little more orange to me, the shadows on her neck. In that case, they would be burnt sienna and ultramarine. Now let's stay with the plan. Let's get the Prussian. Yeah, so burnt sienna and Prussian blue. She does have more of an orangish tone to her shadows. There's more Prussian. And more burnt sienna or Indian red, whichever one you were using. This one has more of a purplish pink tone to it. And her overall flesh is not pinkish. It's more in the orange family. Might use that in the flowers somewhere. I'm just going to scoot it out of the way. But remember, this is a study, so there's opportunity for you to practice and test out some of your colors and see what happens. The easiest way to do that is to mix a small pile like this so that you haven't wasted a ton of paint on one big pile. And then pull it out a little bit to the right or to the left, up or down, whichever way you're going. So this is a lot redder. And again, we might find that in flowers or something on her dress, maybe somewhere. But everything does tend to seem to be a little bit more orangish. Okay, I've got my colors mixed up. I got a cloth rag and some paper towels laid out so that I don't have to stop and break my creative flow. My brushes are out. I have my mineral spirits and my paint right in front of me so that I'm making myself get back from the painting a little bit. I want to keep some distance and not get too close. I also put some clips on the sketchbook to keep my pages from curling, and I'm just barely grabbing the edges of those pages so that I can paint into that, all the way to the edge. So I'm going to start off with just a cheap synthetic sable. It's a little bit stiff. I'm going to swish it around in the turp a little bit, or mineral spirits, just to clean any brush cleaner off of it. And I'm using the Galkid Gamsol walnut oil mix, and I'm just going to barely put a thin coat over the whole dry painting. It's completely dry from last week. If you have any wet areas, this is, you're going to probably smear some of your paint. So I'm going to turn it a little bit to the side so that I can make sure I'm covering it evenly. I don't want it drippy. I just want it to be a nice, thin, wet coat just to bring my colors back up and to give me a nice surface to paint back into. If you put too much medium, if you do lots of layers and lots of layers of medium, you have a tendency for the painting to crack at some point. So you want to be careful with how much medium you use, I think. I was listening to a show this week that talked about Rembrandt and his procedures, and he used linseed oil or walnut oil, and the walnut oil is less likely to yellow. Okay, I also pulled out a selection of brushes. I have a lot of brushes, and so it would slow me down to have to stop and look through all my brushes. So I'll take a few minutes and try to decide what I might need. And I've got these synthetic filberts, these ivory filberts of different widths and lengths. And then I've got some mongoose and one detail brush. So I've got these laying out in front of my easel. It just works better for me to have them. And then once I use them, I'll lay them over here to the right so that I know which ones I've used and I don't end up having to clean them all if I don't use them. I've got the lid on my turp just barely tilted on so that I resist the temptation to dip in the turp. I want to try to use the rag in my hand to wipe off as much as possible. And I'm going to start from the top, like I did last week, just from the back and kind of work my way forward, kind of adjusting some of this. I didn't mention my easel, but I have brought it up forward a bit so that there's no glare on it and for video purposes. But if you want to see how your painting is going to look on the wall, you might want to make sure that it stays vertical and it's not laying back too much, because you'll get different kinds of reflections with it laying back. And I'm really looking at the painting a lot, my source painting here a lot, because I want to clean this up a little bit. I didn't like how it started to get a bit green. Also getting a lot of movement on my easel, so let me secure that. Okay, so I secured my easel now so it's not shaking so much. There are lots of obstacles to painting. It seems like by the time you get everything set up and all your supplies out and all your colors mixed, and the distractions, I just had to move the dogs and do a couple of other things. So there's always a lot to do it. So it's no wonder we don't get to it as much as we want to. So there's a little bit of warmth in these clouds, and it's easier to put that on first before I've got a lot of yellow mixed, a lot of blue mixed, wet blue mixed in. Just want to brighten it a little bit in a few places. So I've got two brushes. I've got a blue and a yellow, light yellow. So I'm kind of going back and forth, and I want to lighten that Prussian because I did not like it. And again, I'm doing those little X's, and you might ask, well, why are you totally painting over the whole thing again? Well, the first estimate is not always right. So I'm back from it a little bit. I've looked at it, and if I don't like what I'm doing, I can just wipe it off and what's underneath will still be there. So that's always an option. It's a little too yellow, so I'm going to lighten up a bit, just kind of drag it over the top. It's mostly almost a light whitish blue down here around the flowers. So, and I'm kind of okay with having this area wet again. I'm probably using too small of a brush. So make yourself always use as large a brush as you can stand to use. It'll make you work a lot less. Now I'm going to move and kind of scumble some light bluish over this column because I misjudged this last time. And I made it a windowsill, thinking it was a windowsill. So I want to drag, and that's too light. Maybe not after I use my finger on it. It's just ultramarine blue with a little bit of white in it. And I want to get that feeling of the shade, the shape of the shade, because I do not have that at all. So I want to kind of correct that. That's like the first thing that I see that's a big error on my painting. And the light area on the post is not quite so yellow. I'm going to scumble a little bit of light over the top of that. So today is all about correcting what you already have on here. So what you do is probably going to be a little different than what I'm doing. And I just want to encourage you to sit down and have a good look at it before you start to see what needs to be fixed the most. Now I'm going to move over to the shade, and I'm going to go ahead and put some lighter. I think I'll move to a larger brush, so again, I'm not working myself to death here. Here we go. I've got blue on the brush, so I want to make sure that it's clean. And in my first test here to see if it's light enough. The lightest area is right here along her neck. Right here in front of her bodice. A little bit here. Remember, you can still come back in over the top. Getting too light there. Needs to be a little bit more yellowish. Yellow ochre. This is a light touch. You notice I'm holding my hand this way instead of this way. So this is, I'm just barely dragging, whoops, that was a little too heavy, too much pressure. Barely dragging a little bit over the top. All right, I readjusted. The way I was leaning was hurting my back, so again, make sure you've got everything set up so that your reach is good, you're not straining. I need to fix the shape of this shade a little bit. I'm getting it kind of mushy. And you want to see the column behind there. You want to see a little bit of the transparency of that shade. I want to correct the shape. You're most fresh at the beginning, so any corrections are better off done right now while you can see what's off in your drawing. It's a little too light right here. Now, I've gotten it pretty chalky looking. I don't have enough rich color in it. So I mixed a little too much purple and lost some of that pretty yellowish, yellow ochre color. So I'm going to drag a little bit of that back in a couple places. Right here. Wiping my brush a lot because when you start to put the light back in here, it picks up the other color underneath it, and then it all turns into mud again. So I don't know. It's a challenge to not just repaint the whole thing. Now, looking at this closer last week when we zoomed in, we found that this maybe isn't an arm after all, that this is just a brush stroke here. So I'm going to just take it out. I'm going to clean my brush because I have yellow on that one. I forget myself and I start painting with the same color, the same brush everywhere. So I'm going to bring this over a little bit to get rid of the top of that arm. I like this ridge along the edge of the shade, and I don't have it. It's really pretty. And I feel like if we don't get the lights in behind her right now while you got the shade wet, that it's going to be hard to go back in later and get those in. So that's why I'm spending more time probably than normal in this area. And again, that's why I didn't want you to spend too much time on her face yet, because you may find that you need to correct some of the drawing at this point. The back of her head is straight down from her arm, just a little over, so I can adjust that. And I can probably go ahead and put some of this pretty light on her dress, if it'll show. And I'm gobbing the paint up. When you lay a gobby vertical type stroke, and this is a diagonal stroke, but when you lay that on, sometimes it'll catch the light. Be real pretty. It doesn't need to be too white though. It needs to have some yellow ochre in it. This may be premature, but I'm going to put it in since I have it on my brush. Put more yellow in it. Don't get too white here. It'll be chalky. It loses the beauty if it's too chalky. Some on the front of her dress here. A little piece here. Now, it's peachy. It's almost like a fleshy light down the front of her dress right here. And I'm using a little of my skin tone color. And this is probably a big no-no. Most people would say you don't want to put these lights in so early. But since I'm not going to do a lot more to the dress, I'm going to mostly glaze the dress later on. Then I don't really want to do a lot more to it. Let's see where else I see that peachy color wrapping around the back of the book. It's peachy back here behind her book a little. Very peachy now that I'm looking at it down here on the bottom. So, just a lot of different color glowing around through here. And I think that'll help to make things really glowy later on, to have some of that peachy color. I see some up here on her bodice. It's that vermilion with a little yellow ochre in it. Here might be too light. A little bit here. Here. That's too light down there. This is shadow down there. So you want to be careful and not introduce really, really light color on the bottom of the dress because it's not that light. It's more of a shadowed tone. All right. I'm going to just, there's so many ways you can work today. I think it makes sense to me to work from the head down. I've prepared some of the area behind her. So I think I'll move now to her hair and her skin tone. And I'm going to clean my brushes up and kind of regroup to work, because I think I'll feel better if I have her hair and her face a little more accurate. Okay, I zoomed in so that I could see her head better, and I mixed up some brown. It's a warm brown. I used that burnt sienna or Indian red, Venetian red with Prussian blue, and I made a really nice dark brown to go on the back part of the head here. I've also checked to see how that head intersects, goes right down through her neck, right about here. So I've got that lined up pretty close. And I want some nice rich darks in there on the back side. There's also a little of that color, but it leans to the redder side right here under her neck. And I'm kind of looking in relationship to this ear. And pretty dark right there. There's a little dot of it on the ear and slightly from the jawline. There's a little bit of it right in front of the headband. A really dark color. Then it moves into a warmer, it's hard to tell. It feels greenish to me. I said that last time. But it's like it's got a, Helen Van Wyck says all hair falls in the yellow family. So it does have a yellowish tone in the front. But I'm noting how this part goes straight across. And remember, this head is almost life-size in the real painting. So what we do here is going to be a little different. It's hard to make a little teeny tiny head like this. Whoops, too light. So I'm going to go back in and mix up some vermilion and yellow ochre to give me a nice orangey color. Because I see that in the headband here. And I see it along the edge of her hair. That I mixed up with the Viridian and, not Viridian, but Prussian and yellow ochre. That's made a nice cool-ish color. Yep, that feels pretty good. And that note right there was way too light, but I'll chisel it down. So back to the Prussian and yellow ochre greenish color. And I see that it's almost like this canvas was toned with green, because I see a little bit of that greenish color around the edges of her hair. It's a really nice cool tone to go against that brown. I'm wiping my brush a lot. And remember, we're just trying to study the colors and everything that she used to see how close. What it'll do is it'll help us think about the next time we paint brown hair. Oh, remember we saw those greenish tones in there. And maybe we will be brave enough to try something totally different that we haven't tried before. I'm working constantly to try to keep the edges of this hair really soft, because there's nothing worse than a big old football helmet for a head. And I know y'all know what I'm talking about because we've all done it. This is some yellow ochre. From a distance, I read this headband is yellow. But when I zoom in and look at it, got some other things going on as well. I see a little bit of a magenta, pretty peachy magenta color right along the top here. It's not that pink. I mean, it's not that light. It's a little bit darker. But it's really beautiful. And I want to put that in there. I'm going to drag some. I use permanent rose. So I think I had you guys put that out the first time. I drag some of that over the top. I want to get rid of my bad spot there. That has a little bit of a yellow tone in it. The light does there. And it is almost pure white there at the very top. A little sparkle right there. It's hard to get. Medium on there really helps the paint move around as if you're working almost wet and wet. Now I want to re-wet the face. And these are really bright colors on her ear. That is almost just pure vermilion. Ooh, I better tone it down. Yeah, put a little bit of yellow, Naples yellow in it. And see it. I am, with this small postage size head, I am going to have to get a small brush. I'm using this small, long filbert. But there's a lot of color in her cheek. So I want to go ahead and put that in kind of boldly to start with. And I do realize that it might take me quite a few tries to get this face right. Remember the tilt, she's looking at this area. There's that warm vermilion color on her neck, just under her chin. And her chin, the point of her chin is straight down from her ear. So make sure you don't lose that tilt. I'll go around her chin here with a little bit of flesh tone. I can then see about where her, under her mouth is, or under her fulcrum, her nose. I don't want to give her too big of a honking nose there. And that nose is in shadow. So the little bit of fleshy orange tone that I mixed with a speck of blue in it is what blue in there. This forehead. Ooh, it's looking a little bit rough. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to be bad before it gets better. So the green and orange kind of shadowy color mixed together. And if I can check the tilt of her nose, I'll hold a straight up line. It's not straight up. It tilts about like that. So always check your angles with a plumb line. So that's about the right tilt. Remember, the nose sticks out farthest, and the profile can be one of the hardest things to paint. So give yourself plenty of chances. Don't, if you do this once or twice or 3 times, don't get discouraged. It's going to take a minute to get this to record right. But there's a little bit of a dark note, but that is too dark. And again, I'm using a pretty wide filbert here. Whoops. Too light. So get back to my shadowy color, which is orange with a little bit of a blue-green mixed in it. And then her mouth is not open. It's shut. And it goes back here. And let's see if I can get that little light plane that defines her cheek in. I think that will help me. Oops, too light. So what's down here on your palette, when you pop it up here against this shadow color, you can see how it's way too light. I went 2 degrees darker. A little bit of light right there. And there's a almost orange color on the top part of that cheek as it rolls up towards her eye. I think Naples yellow would be pretty with some vermilion. So I'm going to mix a little pile of that just to keep on hand. It's a little brighter than using the yellow ochre. So I'm mixing that. Yep, that's what I want. And that's what I want to put right here. Yep, see how pretty that is? I want you to see me struggle through with this too, because it's not going to go on easy, and I knew it wouldn't. Probably will help me too to go ahead and put her lips or indicate where her lips are, because it looks like she has no teeth now. So there's some things that will reassure you as you go along. Remember, the upper lip is a little bit darker. So even just putting this tiny piece in right now will help me feel a little bit better. It's like a sideways heart when you do the mouth from the side. I got her upper lip too dark. That's okay. I'll keep working on it. This is all shadowy. Active. And then one of the things that's so characteristic of her is the light on her eyelid up here. So where I place that's important, because it'll be, I'm sure it's going to be off if I don't put it in the right place. Here's the light plane of her under her eye, which goes up right kind of behind her eye. And then right next to it is this pretty light plane. A little bit of a light plane on her chin. And I have this too dark. I mean, this area goes too far back, so I need to adjust that a bit. I know this is going to be a challenge when I go into it. I don't know how many small heads I've helped students with through the years, and people think it'll be cheaper and less work if you do a small portrait or painting, but that's just not true. It's not less work. Some cases it's a lot more work. It's less canvas, but so I'm going to move to a smaller brush, and I'm going to try to get her eyebrow in. And it is right about here. Goes at this angle. Her lid. And Helen Van Wyck has a video where she starts from the top down, and each successive layer carves the next one down a bit and redefines the shape. So So I'm going to try that with this eye. So here's the upper lid. And here's the next lash line. It's probably too low. Yeah, because it's too close to her nose right there. Goodness. Looks like she's got a unibrow here. Take that out. I like it better with that out. So if you have to, just take that eye off several times. Forehead goes up this way. It's going to be real easy for you to want to just make up a face because you get discouraged with it. So I want to encourage you to try to get the face you see, if at all possible. There, that's a little better. There's a definite distinct angle here, and then here, and then here. And so spot. And then the brow up there. That's a little better. And then let's see if I can check your angle. It's this way. Just put your brush over there and hold it up and try to match the angle that you see with one eye shut. That way. And then down a bit. And then she has this little piece of light right in front of the ear. I'll keep losing it. So let me just encourage you, if you work on this face 10 times, move to something else. And that's what I'll do here in just a sec. But you get stuck on it because you kind of get determined that you're going to figure it out. Another thing sometimes is you can turn the canvas and try to look at it from a different angle to improve an area. Don't give up. That's it. Wipe it off and do it again. Wipe it off and do it again. And that's what great painters do. So, a little bit better. Her lips are not really sweet. She has really sweet lips, and that's what's, her eyes and lips are so soft, and that's a little bit of what's making such a beautiful expression on her. So now I'm getting a little bit, I'm getting my detail brush. Okay, I turned it sideways, which fools your brain into thinking it's a new image. And it really helps you see and match your angles a little better. So I can see that my neck, her neck, is a bit off. If I hold the brush, it's more like this. And then the front of her face, I have this way, and it is this way. So I believe my best bet is to come in with some of the background color, a little bit larger brush, and try to carve her chin down a little under her lips. That's better. See how taking that chin off this way helped correct that angle. This is pretty straight. And then there's this little dip in right under her lip, her bottom lip. And the chin kind of flattens out right there. So again, like I said at the beginning, the angle of this face and neck is so key to getting her to look down here. Now I can see this a little better. And it gets a little pinker, so I may be able to use some of this pink I mixed up earlier that I didn't think I would use. right along in here. Pink, pink, pink. It looks like she just drug her brush over sort of a scoopy way through here. So I can also see the way her collar folds right here too. It's kind of an odd piece. It's red. Not bright red like that. It's got a little bit of blue in it. Goes that way. When I turn it around now, I see she doesn't have enough chin. So I've got to bump this chin back out. Nope, still not her. But it's a little closer. It's better than it was. So that's a thing you have to remember. Each little thing that you do moves you a little closer. Sometimes it moves you further. I like this little piece of hair. It just adds to the movement if you can get it in there. I think part of what it is her lips are too dark. Some of it is her lips are too dark. And there's a real pretty peachy color right there. And on her nostril. All right, so I've scooted in closer. I took a picture of the head and I put it side by side in Photoshop, and I'm going to work on it with this open to see if I can fix it. Her nose looks way too big. There are just quite a few things wrong with it. So I'm going to try my best to make some corrections. The angle is still not right, and I knew that this was going to be an issue. But I also want to get her face right, because if I don't have the face right, I'm just not going to be happy with the rest of it. So the rest of it, I think I can pull it off. I'm just going to, and maybe we can take some relief in knowing that she probably worked hard on this as well. This probably didn't come easy for her. So the light that's shining on her, the front of her dress, it's like backlit. So her dress really wraps around like this. Her dress here, it's just kind of dotted in there. And she laid that big stroke of glow on top, and it's not white. I have it way too white. It has lots of yellow light in it. All right, I'm going to stop and I'm going to move on to something else. I think that's enough. I think I've done it enough harm today. I think it does look better than when I first started, so I think just coming back to it later will be. All right, I started working on the arms a little bit. I had my earbuds off, so I don't think it recorded very good. I mixed up some cat orange, and I'm using some bright spots down here in the hand, in this part of the hand. And then I mixed up a little bit of my blue-gray that I already had, Prussian blue, with a little bit of orange in it. And I've just applied some of that over the top of the arm here. I also darkened this. This is the Prussian blue with orange in it to gray it. And I came back while that was still on my brush and softened some of these highlights I had put in earlier. And I want to double check the shapes of this sleeve. It doesn't look wide enough. She doesn't look like a teenager. She looks like a young woman. So I don't want to make her too thin. Let's see, here's the top of her sleeve. It's down below her neckline, so it should be about like that. There's not much shadow behind her arm here on this side, so you want to make sure you don't outline the arm or the book. This feels outlined because it is a dark edge. And a lot of times it'll help if you make all your strokes this way. It helps if you go back and blend them this way. It just gives it a nice glowy feel to it, and it sort of solidifies your fabric. It wraps it in both directions and in between her fingers. So you could kind of use this dark color to define her fingers a little bit. And I will move to a smaller brush. Make sure it's clean because these are shadows and you don't want to put any white or light in your shadows. You want to keep pure color. I'm using a dark vermilion with some blue in it. That has kind of grayed it down, but it's a shadowy color. I put the first strokes in vertically, and then I like to go back and put them in the opposite direction to help build dimension on this arm. And remember, when you add this blue, it's too blue. It's very much like a bruise. It doesn't have the feeling of flesh. So now I have to come back in here with some fleshy, really warm orangey color. Try to scumble over the top and get it to feel like flesh. I've got this out of whack here. Her dress billows out a bit more here. I think it's important to get that. Then the hand is even with the top of the book, and that's where it sort of drops. It's right there. Right here. There's another big light plane here that I don't quite have in. It goes this way. and then over that way. This way, and then that way. So again, if you can prepare some areas today for the next time you work on it, that'll be good. And maybe I'll glaze a little bit of color over that pot, just so that it's brighter for next time. And I'm going to use some cat orange. Oops, no, I'm not. I'm going to try burnt sienna, because it's more of a transparent color. Wipe that off. There we go. Just a little burnt sienna. So I'm feeling okay about these colors. I've put some peach colors in with this cool blue tone. And I haven't worked any on the flowers. I did glaze a little bit of burnt sienna. Okay, I've made several observations from putting them side by side on the monitor that her head was way too big. And I needed to slice off the whole front segment here and this front segment of hair. So I've mixed up the background color, this shade color, that light yellow ochre and white. And I came in and just took off this whole section. You can see how much shade is left here. And a bit of the front of the bun. Tiny bit of the back of the bun. It was making her head look way too big. And I need to slice off the whole front section of her face, which makes her have way too big of a nose. This is another example of how heads will grow on you as you work on them, on all the features. You make one thing bigger, and before you know it, you've made everything bigger. So the width of her, from her mouth to the back of her neck, is the same as from the neck to here. I have to go back in, but I did want to show you how to fix when your drawing gets off. And it feels really like doing some kind of extreme surgery when you do this. But I don't want you to worry, because it's necessary. A little bit of light up under that chin, and I can fix that later. I'm going to move to a little small brush and come back in here and get the lights back on her face. Actually need to put that front plane of her mouth just as one solid piece to start with, because it's darker here. So she already looks better, even though she looks funny. But if you get the head too wide, it'll look short and squat, and she'll look like she looked like she had a gargantuan head on this body. And the only way I knew it was too big, but the only way I really could see it was to put it side by side. So another reason to have you work on the rest of the painting before you get to this face, because this is going to really stall you out. It has me. I got up first thing this morning and came out here because it was bothering me so much. But this head doesn't look right. It ruins the whole painting. It's just like doing a beautiful landscape and not having a terrible figure in the middle of a beautiful landscape. It wrecks it. There. And my paint was still good and wet from last night, so it was much easier to come back in here and correct these things with the paint being wet. It's the beauty of working in oils. The other thing I wanted you to notice is the photograph I took of my work is much darker than the original version. See the difference? So I have that trouble sometimes with oil paintings. So when I go to work on values, I need to make sure that I take my painting in there with me, and I'll lighten it in Photoshop sometimes because the camera just records the shadows much darker than they really are. So I wanted you to see that. Now, what I'm probably going to do today is I'm going to correct a few of the values. I'm going to go back to the grayscale and correct some of the values. And I'm going to probably leave her face a bit of a blur because it'll be much easier. I think the size is correct now, and it'll be easier to work on that when it's dry. And I've gotten bogged down on it. I woke up thinking about it this morning. So again, I wanted you to see the difference in the values, and I wanted you to see the benefit of putting it side by side, because you can see how much bigger that face got, and I had to slice the whole front of it off and the hair. So I've made the hair a lot smaller. Still maybe need to narrow the back in a little bit. You're freshest when you first look at it, so that's when you need to correct the biggest mistakes. I think the shade looks pretty good. I realize that the pot is a little too high, and the top rim of the pot needs to be bumped down. The whole pot needs to go down a little bit. When I measured it, it was off. The red on the book is popping a little bit too much. The darks right at her crease of her elbow are a little too dark. Okay, I wanted to show you a couple of more little small things. And one is I'm moving the pot down. So I noticed that from the tip of her fingers, the pot is down about this low. So I mixed up a little bit of dark. It's got a little bit too much green in it, so I'm going to lighten it a bit with some, burnt sienna. Yeah, that's better. And I'm going to move this whole edge down. And the pot, actually, the shadow should be down a little lower like this on the pot. It's not a big difference, but if the pot's too close to her hand, it just gives the whole painting a little different feel. And yours may be, you may decide that you have too much done and you don't want to move the pot down. But you don't have to paint the whole thing out and move it down. I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to change and put the rim about here. And so what if you repaint this pot 3 or 4 times? It's okay. It's good practice. Good practice for metallics. That yellow that I just placed. Then I'm going to get a clean mongoose. Make sure it's clean and dry. Actually, I'm going to get a clean